Hello, this is Lauren. I'm from Kentucky and I'm 32, to be honest. I'm still attempting to comprehend all that has transpired. I would have laughed in your face 2 years ago if you had told me that something as trivial as a guy's closest friend would cause my life to fall apart. However, here we are. But because you need to know how this whole thing happened, let me begin from the beginning. When I was 27, I got to know Todd at this little logistics company I worked for. He was this quiet, sort of awkward man. To be honest, I didn't initially notice him. Todd was the man who would wear the same 3 button-downs to meetings, all a little wrinkled, with a tie that never matched. I was dating this gaudy bartender, however, he stayed late one day to assist me in correcting some reports that I had made a mistake on. Before I knew it, I was looking forward to seeing him at work more than anyone else. That evolved into this late-night coffee run. He was different from the men I was accustomed to. When my car broke down, Todd was the kind of person who would drive me home without making me feel like I owed him anything. He was reliable and stable. A few months later, we began dating and things went quickly. We were sharing this small apartment in the heart of the city by the time I reached 29. Although it wasn't glitzy, it belonged to us since I've always liked decorating. I did most of the work and Todd was okay with whatever I wanted. In hindsight, perhaps that ought to have been a warning sign. He didn't object to anything, and he wouldn't even express his dislike to me. However, I thought at the time, wow, what a catch. Things were going well for a while. We followed our routines. At this local office, I was in charge of accounts and Todd was an analyst. We would go to this small pizza place nearby or binge watch whatever was trendy in the nights. On the weekends, we would either spend time with our friends or spend time alone. It felt comfy even though it wasn't flawless, as if we were constructing something substantial. The problem with me, though, is that I become bored easily. Todd is the type of person who enjoys consistency. For heaven's sake, he would prepare his lunches a week ahead of time. I attempted to encourage him to be more impulsive by suggesting things like going on a haphazard road trip or simply skipping work to spend the day at a brewery. However, he would always have some excuse: financial constraints, deadlines at work, etc. He's just responsible, I told myself at first. Therefore, it's all right. However, it became oppressive after a while. Jake, my best friend, began to visit more frequently about this time. Since college, Jake and I had been close. Everyone wanted to hang out with him and he was the life of the party. Although Todd didn't talk much about him, I could tell he didn't like him. And to be honest, I didn't mind. Although Jake and I didn't have a romantic past, he simply understood me better than Todd did. He was impetuous and entertaining and the type of person who would propose karaoke at midnight on a Tuesday and actually pull it off. I began hanging out with Jake more, going out for drinks after work and staying at his apartment when I didn't want to deal with Todd. At first, Todd didn't talk much about it, but I could sense him becoming more distant. I did notice when he stopped inquiring about my day and began retiring to bed earlier without me. However, I assumed he would move on. It wasn't like I was doing anything incorrectly, really. Todd knew, or at least I believed he did, that Jake was simply an acquaintance. At first, Todd and I were experiencing these subtle, nearly imperceptible changes in our relationship. It was little matters. When I went out with Jake, he stopped waiting for me. In the past, Todd would be on the couch, half asleep, watching a movie. Even if I arrived home at midnight, however, the apartment was completely black when I arrived one evening. His note on the counter simply read, "Had an early meeting." Todd was known for his ability to stay up late, so it wasn't like him to do otherwise. Being present, but he was simply exhausted. I reminded myself, not a huge deal. However, pattern. Todd would be in bed when I got home from a late supper or happy hour with Jake. He ceased inquiring about my whereabouts and companionship. To be honest, it felt like he was being needy before, so I was relieved in part. A part of me, though, questioned whether he was simply keeping his anger to himself. Todd wasn't the kind to scream or lose his temper. He would go silent if he was. And believe me when I say that his quiet spoke more than any argument. Strangely, I think I retreated even further from him because of his distance. At first, I didn't even realize I was doing it. I began spending less time at home and scheduling activities on my calendar that did not involve Todd, such as gym classes, lunch with coworkers, and sporadic outings to the mall with Jake. However, Todd never voiced any complaints. He didn't say he missed me or ask me to stay. Okay, have fun. He simply murmured and returned to his task. And that infuriated me even more than it ought to have. For example, why didn't he compete for my attention? Was he no longer concerned? We had this awkward supper one evening that has stayed with me ever since. It felt like we were sitting across from each other the entire time. Even though I had only prepared spaghetti and some garlic bread, he simply nodded as though he wasn't even paying attention when I told him about my day. And this obnoxious client I had to deal with, I finally lost it. Are you even listening? I slammed my fork down and asked. Yeah, I'm listening, he answered. Looking up in surprise, you brought up the subject of work. You're just going to say that? Nothing, no response, no advice. Lauren, what do you want me to say? His tone was calm but weary as he asked, I didn't think you even wanted to talk to me because you've been so checked out lately, not because he was incorrect, but more because it struck a chord that silenced me. I had been checked out, even if I didn't want to acknowledge it. It seemed to me that we were simply sharing the same place. I told myself it was because he was too much of a homebody, dull and predictable. However, I knew in my heart that I wasn't really trying either. However, I chose to roll my eyes and say, whatever, rather than take responsibility for it, and we ate supper in silence. After then, things deteriorated. Todd claimed to have more work to accomplish and began to spend more time in his home office. I didn't really care, so I didn't inquire as to whether that was the case. I was too preoccupied with looking at Jake's most recent posts on Instagram. I couldn't help but feel like I was missing out on something because of the way he made his life seem so light and enjoyable. Todd, however, found delight in ordering takeout from a brand new Thai restaurant down the street. Then came the evening that Todd asked me if I wanted to go on a real date. It felt so forced that I nearly burst out laughing. I simply shrugged and said, sure, if you want. When the evening finally arrived, I wasn't even in the mood for the quiet small steakhouse he had recommended and that we had visited a few times previously. All day long, Jake texted me with updates on his most recent Tinder encounter and memes. And to be honest, I would have preferred to be with him. However, I went primarily to avoid Todd accusing me of bailing. It was a disastrous date. Todd made an effort to strike up a conversation by inquiring about my work and weekend plans. But I only responded with brief, one-word responses. It's not like I was with him, so I'm not sure why. I simply didn't want to talk. We ate in almost silence after he eventually gave up. Do you even want to be here? He asked me once, and I pretended to smile. Of course I do, I responded. However, I didn't, and I believe he was aware of this since he simply nodded and resumed eating. He didn't say anything when we arrived home and immediately went to bed. After a few years, I remained up looking through my phone, wondering if this was the norm for relationships, dull, comfy, and predictable. The problem is that I didn't want to be by myself, so I didn't want to end our relationship with Todd. All I wanted was more attention, more thrill, more something. And I got that from Jake. He gave me the impression that I was the most fascinating person in the room, that my stories were entertaining, and that my jokes were humorous. Although I can now see how things were falling apart, I didn't consider it to be that severe at the time. I assumed that Todd and I were simply going through a difficult time and that it would pass. However, I now understand that was the start of the end. It began like every other night before everything went awry. I was splayed out on the couch, browsing Instagram while Todd was in his office. I couldn't take my eyes off Jake's posts about the concert he was at. Every time he tagged me in a post with the caption, "Wish you were here," I grinned. It felt good to be wanted. I can't even recall why I got up and went inside Todd's office, but I was stopped in my tracks by something I saw. He was sitting there staring at his screen, staring at me, or more precisely, my Instagram. Instead of working as he claimed to be, I watched as he looked through my pictures, stopping at a picture of Jake and me at breakfast that I had uploaded a few weeks prior. Todd remained silent and sat there with his hand grasping the mouse so tightly that I felt it was real. It could shatter. What are you doing? My voice was sharper than I meant when I asked. I'd seen enough. He jumped and hurriedly minimized the screen, but it was too late. Did you follow me on Instagram? I crossed my arms and pressed. Are you stalking? He reiterated in a chilly tone. That's not what I would name it. My wife obviously spends more time with him. than with me, so I'm just trying to figure out where she's at. That hit me like a slap, but I became defensive rather than apologize or try to explain. Todd is my friend Jake. How many times must I repeat that to you? At last he looked me in the eye and got to his feet. A friend, you spend more time with him than with me, Lauren. You go out to dinners and concerts, you laugh at his jokes. You share photos of yourself with him, and you do so much more. Are you even aware of that appearance? Naturally, he would exaggerate this, so I rolled my eyes. My existence appears to be more than just this flat. I apologize. I don't spend all of my time at home waiting for you to get off work. You know it's not what it's about, he added, raising his voice. Lauren, you don't even seem to care that you're going against the rules. I lost my temper over that. Todd, what lines? Laughing at a friend's jokes while hanging out with him for once in my life. God forbid I enjoy myself. Todd's jaw tensed as he shook his head. You don't understand. You're too self-centered to realize how disrespectful you are to me, Lauren, and our marriage. The term selfish made me feel enraged. Oh, I'm the villain now? Perhaps I wouldn't need to spend time with Jake feel alive if you weren't so dull and predictable. I felt regret as soon as I said those words. It was because of the way Todd's face collapsed. Not because they weren't true. I felt a brief pang of shame as he stared at me as if I had just kicked him in the belly. But I pushed it aside since I believed that he was to blame. Perhaps I wouldn't have to search elsewhere for it if he would simply relax and have more pleasure. For a long time, Todd remained silent. Do whatever you want, Lauren, he whispered quietly as he returned to his desk and sat down. You're obviously going to anyhow. I couldn't let it go, even though that should have been the end of it. I detested his composure and his pretense of being morally upright. Todd, do you know what's wrong? While you make no attempt to make me, you expect me to sit here and be this ideal little wife. His eyes were flaming when he turned to face me. No work. Do you mean me? You're so preoccupied with yourself that you don't even realize how hard I've been working to make this work. I retorted that perhaps I might notice if you weren't constantly so preoccupied with your work. God knows you're not contributing much else, so work is the only thing holding this house together. He said. It hurt. He was aware that I had been having trouble at work, barely meeting deadlines, and losing out on a promotion that I had been hoping for. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I fought the need to show him my tears. Wow, I murmured in a shaky voice. He looked tired and groaned, running a hand through his hair to get a sense of how you truly feel. Lauren, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of feeling like I'm competing with Jake for wife's attention. I'm tired of walking on eggshells because I don't know what version of you I'm coming home to. And I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter. I wanted to counter him, to debate. But for once I had nothing to say because I knew in my heart that he was correct. However, I couldn't say it, so I murmured whatever and left the room, slamming the door behind me. I texted Jake all night long that night to let him know what Todd had said. I felt better for a while after he responded with his typical quips, accusing Todd of being jealous and dull. However, Todd was already asleep with his back to me when I eventually went into bed. And for the first time, I thought perhaps we had gone too far. My bed was empty when I woke up the following morning. It wasn't unusual that Todd was already gone. But this time, something was different. In most cases, he would text me or leave a note with his daily agenda. Nothing this time. At first, I dismissed it, assuming he was simply busy, but as the day wore on, the uneasy feeling in my gut persisted. I hadn't heard from him by lunchtime. I texted, "Hey, everything okay?" But all I received was a terse, unfriendly fine, which was not at all like him. I became quite alarmed at that point, at least not publicly. Todd was not the kind to harbor resentment, felt different from his usual passive-aggressive, let's pretend everything's fine style. Somehow, it felt definitive. He hardly gave me a glance when he got home that night. He sat on the couch as if I hadn't been there, placed his suitcase by the entrance, and went straight to the kitchen to get a drink, trying to appear casual. I said, "Rough day?" He murmured something like that as he flipped through the TV's channels, unsure of what to say. I stood there. The stubborn, arrogant part of me refused to back down, even though there was a part of me that wanted to apologize and tell him that what I had said the previous evening wasn't meant. Rather, I pretended everything was all right while I sat next to him and browsed through my phone for what seemed like hours. We sat in quiet. "We need to talk," Todd finally turned off the TV and turned to face me. Those four words struck me like a ton of bricks. I said, about what, even though I knew already, about us, about where is going. He groaned and rubbed his temples as if he were struggling to find the patience to deal with me. Already on the defensive, I shot out, where is what going? This, he murmured, pointing to us, whatever this is. Because it doesn't feel like a marriage anymore, Lauren. It feels like two people living in the same house pretending they don't hate each other. I hurriedly answered, I don't hate you, but it sounded more like a justification than a guarantee. He remarked, well, you sure don't act like you love me, with a flat accent. However, you spend all of your time with Jake, which is riddled with hurt. When I try to arrange something, you ignore me, and when we do communicate, it seems like you are eager for the conversation to end. Are you even interested in marrying me? Like a ticking time bomb, the question lingered in the air. I had the option to say yes, to explain that I was simply going through a phase or that I had been feeling strange lately. But I chose to sidestep the question. You're overreacting. Just because I have a life outside of you doesn't mean I don't want to be with you. A life outside of me? He asked again, raising his voice. For the first time, Lauren, you've built your whole world around Jake. You don't even see it. Do you? I said, Jake's my friend for the millionth time in a row. You're making this into something it's not, and you're making me into the bad guy for not being okay with it, he responded. Do you even hear yourself? You're gaslighting me. Lauren, you're trying to make me feel crazy for being upset about something that any husband would be upset about. The term gaslighting triggered me. Oh, so now I'm some kind of manipulative villain? Give me a break, Todd. You're just insecure because Jake's fun and you're not. I knew I had gone too far the moment I uttered it. Todd's expression hardened, and he got to his feet, staring down at me as if he hadn't even seen me before. You know what? Lauren, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not fun, but at least I'm not disrespectful. At least I'm not selfish. Selfish? I said again, trembling. Unselfish because I want to have a friend. Because I want to have a life outside of being your wife. He answered, no, you're selfish because you don't care how your actions affect anyone but yourself. In a calm yet icy tone, you don't care how they affect me. You don't care how they make me feel. You just do whatever you want and expect me to be okay with it. I looked at him, trying to think of something to say. But for once I couldn't think of anything. I detested the fact that he was correct, however. I chose to sit there in quiet with my arms crossed like a whiny child rather than acknowledge it. Todd let out another sigh as if he was worn out from simply staring at me. I can't keep doing this, Lauren. I've been trying to hold on, trying to make this work, but you've checked out. And I'm done being the only one fighting for this. I tried to sound calm, but my voice was shaking as I asked, are you saying you want a divorce? When he stated, I don't know, I was more alarmed than if he had said, yes. But I know I can't keep living like this. Something has to change. I sat there dumbfounded and silent as he picked up his luggage and went to the bedroom. I was aware for the first time that Todd was not going to wait around indefinitely, and I was unsure for the first time whether I cared enough to stop him. Todd and I weren't simply uneasy after that altercation. We were cold. We hardly ever talked unless it was to discuss groceries or bills, and even then, it seemed more like two co-workers juggling a shared workload than a married pair. He didn't mention Jake once more. He was clearly still considering it. He would give me these expressions as if he were unsure whether to say something or to ignore it. To my annoyance, he consistently opted for the latter. Say something if you're angry, don't you? Don't sit there and mope. The problem is that I continued to spend time with Jake. I actually leaned closer to it. Todd had essentially accused me of putting Jake above him, and I partially reasoned that if that's what you believe, I might as well explain. Even though Todd wasn't trying to make me happy, I felt like I deserved to be happy. Even though I knew it was petty, my getaway was Jake. He made me feel enjoyable, and he made me giggle. When I was with him, I didn't feel like the annoying wife or the uncooperative employee. Jake asked me to attend a party at his friend's house one evening. I assumed Todd wouldn't care, or worse, would care too much and we'd argue again, so I didn't even bother informing him. I simply stated that I was leaving and stopped there. Loud music, delicious beverages, and people who didn't have any expectations of me made the party what I needed it to be. Jake was having a time, dancing and making jokes as if nothing were wrong. I put Todd and our issues out of my mind for a few hours. Then Jake did something that surprised me, though. He leaned near to me, his arm making contact with mine. As we sat on the crowded couch, I laughed it off, but my stomach turned over. He remarked in a voice that was low enough only I could hear. I don't get why you're still with Todd. You deserve better. I said, don't start, in an attempt to appear informal. I'm serious, he demanded for a moment. I was unsure of how to react to the words that lingered in the air. You're too good for him. He doesn't appreciate you. I wanted to tell him that he was mistaken and that Todd was a decent man who simply didn't know how to express it. However, there was a part of me that wanted to trust him. The part that felt invisible and inconsequential at home. It's complicated, I remarked at last, sipping my beverage. The seed had been sown. But Jake didn't press it. His remarks replayed in my mind during that night's trip home. Did I merit better? Was it pointless to try to save something that couldn't be saved? I was even more perplexed by the time I arrived home. When I entered the living room, I saw Todd sitting there with his laptop open on the coffee table. His face unreadable. He looked up at the sound of the door. He said, "You're late." In a neutral but not particularly cordial tone. It wasn't a night at school. Why does it matter? I snarled back, kicking off my shoes. He shut down his laptop and slumped back on the couch, crossing his arms. You didn't even tell me where you were going. I said, didn't know I needed permission, in a sarcastic tone. Lauren, he replied with a sigh. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for respect, but clearly that's too much to ask. Respect, I asked again, raising my voice. You're the one who's been acting like I'm some villain in this marriage? Maybe if he treated me like his wife instead of his roommate, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Todd shook his head, his jaw tightening. I don't even know who you are anymore. Maybe if you paid attention, you'd figure it out, I snapped. From there, the argument escalated, with both of us hurling out every grievance we'd been harboring. For months, I accused him of being emotionally unavailable, boring, and putting happiness ahead of our marriage. By the end of it, we were both exhausted, sitting on opposite ends of the couch like strangers. Todd finally remarked, I can't do this anymore, in a calm but forceful voice. What is the intended meaning of that? Even though I understood exactly what he meant, I still asked. He got to his feet and said, it means I'm done fighting for someone who doesn't want to fight for me. His words struck a deeper chord than I had anticipated, and for a moment I just stared at him, unsure of how to respond. A part of me wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong. But another part of me, the part that had been depending on Jake for everything Todd wasn't giving me, knew he wasn't totally wrong. The morning after that argument, I woke up to an empty bed. At first, I thought Todd had already left for work, but when I checked my phone, I saw a text from him saying, I need some space. Todd then went to bed, leaving me alone in the living room with my thoughts, and for the first time, I wondered if perhaps we had reached the point of no return. Don't give me a call. I'll come back when I'm ready to talk. Todd didn't usually make big departures or storm off, so if he was leaving, even for a short time, it indicated something had changed drastically. I sat there, staring at the message, feeling conflicted. I wanted to call him to demand an explanation, but his text made it obvious he wasn't interested in hearing from me, so I texted Jake instead, as I always did when I was upset. I was angry that he would just leave without talking it out. But I was also afraid that this wasn't just a cooling off period. In less than an hour, Jake arrived like a rescuer, coffee in hand. What happened? As he gave me the cup and took a seat next to me on the couch, he inquired, as if it didn't affect me. I said, Todd left, adding, he said he needs space or whatever. Jake's eyebrows went up. What does that mean? Are you all taking a vacation? I said, I don't know, and he was being dramatic. He'll most likely return in a day or two. Honestly, Jake said with a sly smile, you're better off without him. I feigned a laugh, saying, don't start. I'm serious, Lauren, he added with a softer voice. You deserve someone who actually values you, someone who doesn't make you feel like you're too much or not enough. The next couple of days were a blur. Todd didn't come home, and he didn't text me either. At first, I tried to act like I didn't care, going about my day, hanging out with Jake, and telling myself that Todd was just being immature. But as the hours passed, the silence began to get to me, and I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for some sign that he still cared, but there was nothing. I didn't respond right away because it felt like he was saying everything I'd been hoping Todd would say, and it hit me hard that maybe Jake wasn't just my friend, or maybe he was, but I was starting to want him to be something more. By the third day, I was getting impatient. That evening, Jake brought a bottle of wine, and we sat on the couch to watch some pointless TV show. I wasn't really listening, though, because I was thinking about Todd, wondering where he was, what he was thinking, and if he was returning. Jake must have realized, because he leaned over and said, "You're better than this, you know," sitting around waiting for him. "Lauren, you don't need him," with my heart pounding. I turned to face him and asked, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you deserve to be happy. And I think you know Todd isn't the one who's going to make that happen," he continued, shrugging as he paused as if he were unsure whether to cross a line. It wasn't planned, it wasn't some big romantic moment. It just happened. I let myself get lost in it for a few seconds. But then reality hit me like a ton of bricks and I pulled back, my face burning. "I can't," I said, getting up and putting some distance between us. "This isn't right." I didn't immediately respond, but something about the way he looked at me in that moment made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. "I get it," Jake replied gently, looking saddened. But he nodded. "But you need to figure out what you want, Lauren." After saying, "You can't keep living in this limbo," he departed, leaving me to think by myself, in spite of my desire to blame Todd for everything. I couldn't deny that I was the one who had gone too far. That night, I sat on the couch and stared at the door, hoping that Todd would walk through it and somehow make things right, but he didn't. And for the first time, I began to wonder if perhaps he never would. The kiss had been brief, but it felt like a point of no return. Every time I considered calling Todd, I talked myself out of it, telling myself that he should be the one to reach out, because he was the one who left. But the truth was that I wasn't sure if I wanted him to return because I missed him, or because I didn't want to deal with the fallout of his permanent absence. It was a week before I heard from him again, 7 full days of silence. And I was going crazy. "You're back," I said, keeping my tone neutral for the moment. "You're back," he replied, his voice flat. That hit me like a brick, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I crossed my arms and said, "So, are you going to tell me where you've been? Or is this some kind of dramatic reentrance?" When he finally came home, it was late in the evening and I was sitting on the couch, half watching some reality show, when I heard his key in the lock. "I've been staying with my brother," Todd said, sighing and taking a seat in the armchair across from me. I needed time to think about what I asked, even though I had a pretty good idea about us, about whether this is even worth trying to save. The room fell silent and I felt my throat constricted, but I controlled myself. "So, what did you decide?" I tried to seem unconcerned as I asked. "I decided that I can't do this anymore, Lauren, not like this," Todd said, leaning forward and supporting his elbows on his knees. "I don't feel loved in return. Even if I adore you, while you're off living a separate life, I feel like I'm in a marriage by myself." His remarks wounded me, but I became defensive rather than apologized. "Oh, so this is all my fault now, and the worst part is, I don't even think you realize how much you've hurt me. Todd, it was you who checked out first. You gave up trying. I didn't even feel like I was here because of you." "What about Jake?" he retorted. "How does it feel to watch my wife post photos of herself with another man, spend all of her time with him, and act as though he is her spouse?" I had not told Todd about the kiss and had no intention of telling him, so when I said, "He's my friend," it felt hollow, especially in light of what had transpired with Jake. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," I replied. "Am I? Lauren, you've been disrespecting me and our marriage for months and you don't even see it," Todd stated, raising his voice for the first time. "Or perhaps you simply don't care that you do." "That's not fair," I said. "I've been trying to make this work. But you've been so checked out I don't even know how to reach you anymore." "Trying?" said Todd, shaking his head. "What do you call that? Making me feel like a third wheel in my own marriage by ignoring me whenever I try to speak with you and running off with Jake whenever you can." I was unsure of how to respond to that. I wanted to yell at him and tell him that he was wrong, that he was just being jealous and insecure. But I was also afraid that he wasn't completely wrong. Eventually, Todd got up and said, "I didn't come back to fight, Lauren. I returned to inform you that I'm finished. I can't continue like this." The words lingered in the air, definite and weighty. "I want a divorce." Stunned, I looked at him. "Divorce? You can't be serious," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper, even though it wasn't like I hadn't considered it before. Hearing him say it aloud made it feel true in a way I wasn't expecting. His response was, "I've never been more serious. I love you, Lauren, I really do. But I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me, and I don't think you even respect yourself." That last statement was more powerful than I had anticipated, and I started crying. "That's it," I said, my voice shaking. "You're just walking away." I didn't try to stop him. I just sat there, frozen, listening to the sound of the door closing behind him. Lauren said softly, "I've already been gone, you just didn't notice." With that, he picked up his bag and made his way to the door. I stayed up that night thinking about everything, about Todd, about Jake, about all the decisions I had made that had brought me to this point. I wanted to blame Jake for stepping over boundaries and making me doubt everything. And I wanted to blame Todd for leaving, for not fighting harder. But I knew that I was to blame because I had been reckless, selfish, and impulsive with the one person who had always tried to make me happy. Here's the thing, though, in my mind, I had done what I had to do to find happiness. Even if it had blown up in my face, perhaps that made me the antagonist in Todd's story. But at least I was being honest about who I was, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I was sad that it had ended this way. That I had lost someone who truly cared about me, but I didn't regret the decisions I'd made.